Tandem Press Department of Art Visiting Artist Lecture. This lecture has been made possible with the very generous support of the Anonymous Committee. But I'm particularly honoured this evening to welcome to Madison and to introduce Jane Rosen. This is her first visit here, and we have had a wonderful week with her. Jane was born in New York but moved to California 10 years ago and assures us that she is still a New Yorker. We have the privilege of having her working at Tandem, and I hope that you will all visit the press in the near future to see the beautiful prints that she has created. For Jane, art is a daily practice whereby she seeks to understand the laws of nature. Her work brings to mind the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, for whom drawing was not an end in itself, but a way of examining the workings of the world around him. She speaks of her work as a byproduct of an investigation. She is primarily a sculptor, and her hand-blown glass and mixed marble sculptures, like her prints and drawings, incorporate ancient ideas, but their presentation is rooted in a post-minimalist structure. By reducing the information she gives us, her sculpture and her drawing points to the connectedness of all life, and you will hear more about this tonight. Her work is included in many public and private collections. She is exhibited widely. Please join me in welcoming Jane Rosen.
That was very nice. Thank you. Thank you. I probably have some kind of a technological disability, so if I get this right. I thought I was mostly talking with, can you show me which is forward and back?
Yep. This one's forward for the right one.
Okay.
And then that one's forward for the left one.
Okay. Okay. Mostly I thought I was speaking with students, and so the way I organize this is actually the work that I did at NYU. And I had just, basically, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I spent 40 years there. These pieces, that's me like getting out of college. And actually, I studied with Chuck Close at NYU, and my studio mate at NYU was Ross Bleckner, who's a painter. You may not know of his work, or you might. Okay. But when I got out of school and everyone was talking about less being more, I was absolutely convinced they were wrong. I couldn't imagine how less is more. And Judy Pfaff came from Yale in this truck and arrived at this loft in Soho and basically said to me, everyone at Yale is saying less is more. I don't know, I might be wrong, but I think more is more. So this is basically these 8x10 canvases. I was trained by Chuck as a painter. I probably am going to stay on this slide too long, and Paula's going to tell me to move ahead. But it's hard because I want to give you some background, especially if you're coming up to be an artist, and what it actually takes from the beginning, and how many changes there are, and what the influences are, and what your real questions are. And I thought that, I mean, this is all done with lace and cement and canvas, and I sewed all of the canvas because Best Products, actually, that light's shining right in my eyes there. Best Product traded with Judy and I, and they sold appliances. We had no money. So I got a sewing machine, a washer and dryer, and a typewriter. And this was made with those things and what I could find on the street. I have a ton of work. And so I'm going to go very quickly through the first 10 years. I guess out of school, I came in through the height of process art and minimalism. Now these are on canvas, and I thought of them as containers for energy. And they are basically paint that I made so thick that it became a substance, and I would hone down those surfaces. And wow, look at that. The slides are bigger than the screens. How could that be? But very shortly, you can see these are the early paintings. And that was probably tar that was sewn with canvas. And, oh, I should look at my notes because I guess I might be nervous. But that's my dog, Tartuffe. And this was my first show at Ed Thorpe. Let's see if I move ahead here. And basically, these are still on canvas. And they're all chiseled out and inlaid. I very much wanted a material, and I thought of myself as a relief artist in every possible sense of the word. And these were these animal presences that I thought perhaps, because they were so minimal, the art world wouldn't notice that I was trying to investigate something that I didn't understand, that I saw in everything. And let's see if I go back to, so I got written up in Art in America, and the interviewer asked me about this piece called Tartuffe, and I said it was my dog's stomach, which it was. How come the slides are higher than the... Is that okay? Can you see them?
Yeah, but she's going to fix it.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, is that okay? All right. So this piece on the left is called Rook, and on the right it's called Clown Face, and they were basically bowling ball size. This was a time, are you interested in what was going on in the New York art world while I was doing this? Because I'm living in a loft with Judy on Green Street. I'm hanging out with Joel Shapiro, Ross Bleckner, Julian Schnabel, who was the short order cook at the Broome Street Bar, and people were working in a little bit, Susan Rothenberg was a friend, and people were working a little bit differently. I was basically cooking up a kind of alchemy, trying to find out how things formed. But I was doing it in the language of the time that I lived in. And what I want to say about this is that Chuck Close, who I just saw a fabulous video on, and he said in the video that he was looking to extend the language of art. And I loved him as a teacher, and I respect him enormously as an artist. But one thing I will say is that I was never interested in extending the language of art. I was interested in using the language of art in order to approach the questions that I sought to understand. Whether the language was the language of Chinese landscape painting, or Brancusi, or Chuck Close, or minimalism, and I would more or less spin those things around and use whichever thing, like a musical instrument, that could play the song or tell the story that I most sought to understand at that time. And I guess for me, since the very beginning, the question I most have, well, can you see them? Okay. So this is a material, basically, that's made out of marble dust, gypsum cements, powdered pigments. It's built over an armature that I made. It's not cast. And I'm trying to see how the hand forms to make a horse, or how the hand forms to make a chest, which is also a cow's head, which is also the aurora borealis in the surface if you pull it in a certain way. And I was very much, this is a show at Ed Thorpe's on West Broadway, interested in forms which ride between images. That if I could find a place where, well, you'll see, I hope. And these are, again, I'm still thinking about them as containers for energy. These are the same material. It's both additive and reductive. Are you at all interested in size or how the stuff gets made? Is that? Sure. Yeah. Because it was kind of unusual at the time. It's basically 10 inches of paint that I'm going from 50 to 600, sanding down, chiseling out, inlaying, studying Greek art, going to the Met every day. And I'm starting to get there's the lint. This is 8 feet and about 300 pounds. And this is called manta-ray. So there's layer upon layer that's chiseled out and inlaid. And I got very well known at that period, which was called New Image Painting. And I guess I was doing the sculpture. Something was wrong. I think I was looking at Eli Nadelman, I was looking at Brancusi, but it was really a kind of a stylization that didn't approach what I was really after. The laws behind nature. I have a million things I wrote to talk to you about, but I guess I'm not going to do it. I knew I was going to get nervous about this. So I went back to the Art Students League and found this man named Robert Beverly Hale, who was the curator of drawing at the Met, and he taught Renaissance drawing technique. And I started to study Renaissance drawing technique. And I discovered Rodin, and I started, now again, we're talking about post-minimalism, we're talking about an art world that had no interest at all in 60-inch drawings that had to do with trying to find in the movement of the hand the movement of nature itself. And I read this quote from Rodin called "The idea behind my works." And I'm drawing all the time. And he says, when you follow nature, you find everything. It is not a matter of creating the new. The words creating and inventing are superfluous words. Revelation comes only to those who perceive with their eyes and minds. Everything is contained in what surrounds us. Everything is given in nature, which is imbued with eternal, uninterrupted movement. A woman's body, a mountain, a horse are one and the same in terms of conception, and they are all built according to the same principles. And so my life basically changed. I come from a family of scientists, and somehow nature, if you look at Webster's, the definition of nature, if I can find it, is pretty amazing. I don't know where it is. Okay, this is Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. Nature, the inherent character or basic constitution of a person or thing, essence. Disposition, temperament. A creative and controlling force in the universe. Not pansies. An inner force or the sum of such forces in an individual. 4. The physical constitution or drives of an organism. 5. A spontaneous attitude as of generosity. 6. The external world in its entirety. 7, man's original or natural condition. 8, a simplified mode of life resembling this condition. And that's the only one we think it is. So I guess my wish was to use art to understand the laws that govern us, that govern nature, the invisible reality behind the visible reality, that would allow us, in fact, to see our own better human nature. And I know I'm a little nervous talking about this stuff, but that's what's great about making art, is that here I'm trying to see how things form. These drawings are just charcoal. They're about 5 to 7 feet big. If I could understand how my hand worked through the Renaissance drawing techniques, which were really about approaching science. How do I explain this? Okay, to me, it's not one thing or the other. It's like there's a diamond. And the one facet on a diamond is science. One facet is art. One is music. One is literature. And actually, if you go deep enough into any facet, you start to approach the other. I have no idea. So I was working figuratively. I lobbed off all the heads and ended up with what we call struggle forming. And that's a huge piece. And I started showing at Grace Borgenecht. I'm just going to show you the images because apparently I'm not feeling like talking. I sort of knew that. These are journal pages. I think that these explain very well. So these drawings are really a study sheet. I use drawing to study. And this is actually called Praying While Smoking. And it comes from a Zen story, which is, I remember the story of 2 Zen monks, both prodigious smokers. Concerned about the question of smoking during their prayer time, they decided to consult their superiors. While one was given a stern reprimand, the other was given a pat of encouragement. The unlucky one, greatly puzzled, decided to ask his friend exactly how he had posed his question. He said, I asked whether it was permissible to pray while smoking. And I think there's a lot to do with how you go about making art. And so these pieces were a huge breakthrough for me because I was approaching how things formed and starting to study the spiral formation in nature through other artists. This is called afterpogony. This is all very complicated technically, but it didn't matter. They were these essences or bodies that had to do with the movement on the wave and how the hand actually forms things, and that not only does it form things, but that these movements that your hand makes are actually all of the movements on these very large and very small scales. So I guess I was trying, and I'm always trying, to spin Brancusi and Rodin and science and a lot of things that I'm studying. Judy and I went to see the Spectacular Helmets of Japan show. And I thought, oh my good God, this guy, you know, these are these samurai warriors and they're going to war with a pumpkin on their head, you know, or a lobster tail. And they were talking about the embodiment of a certain state or energy in nature and the surface that would create that in order to give them the presence. These things were real, like the Chauvet caves, like the Japanese prints we're looking at. It's not some kind of like decorative art. It was how you live your life. And for me, for example, there's no mystery in the Sphinx. It's obvious. You should think like a man. You should have the courage of the lion or the chess beast of a lion. You should have the strength of the bull, the freedom of the eagle, and you'll be a man, my son. To use animal natures to understand our own nature. And this was my way of exploring it. At the same time, this is called closed wing. I'm using the language that is occurring in the world I'm living in, which is the New York art world. But I also have this thing that's I'm always drawing and trying to understand. And I guess a lot of it had to do with Jane Hammond said, who's a painter friend, she sort of said, your problem is, Jane, is your art, if 1 is abstract and 10 is realistic, are you a 2, are you an 8, are you a 6? Okay, so one of my problems is that, or one of my blessings, excuse me, it's going to be Judy. Should I answer it? What if it's not Judy? We press talk. Is it?
Hello? Hello? Oh. She's in the middle of giving a lecture. Can I have her call you back? Okay.
It's not Judy? Okay.
Okay. Okay. Bye.
Is that I'm really not, if I was relaxed, you would see I would be doing very well. But this kind of format where I can't really see you or talk with you, or we're not talking about something, and it's very hard on me. I was trying to explain that to them because I don't like it. But I would rather just do a question and answer and you talk about stuff and I show you the images and I'd be fine. But one thing that drove me nuts was that I met a man named Mr. Ansley Yard who he really was an amazing man. He taught me how to fish with a soda can and a line. And he asked me what kind of art I made. And I realized that he wouldn't understand my work. And there came to me this question of who and what does my art address? And I think that the imagery that you begin to see here of the presence of the white heron, which again is this spiral formation that I pretty much, even in this you can see, I see in everything. And I wanted to make work that you didn't need a master's degree in art history to understand. I wanted to make work that I could tell the story that I was here to tell, and that it could be seen. And this is we're now at 1986. I'm doing pretty good in terms of time. So then I'll relax when I get through this part. And these were the 3 herons, which were written about in Art in America by Stephen Westfall, who said that they looked like 3 teenage boys on a dance floor who had no intention of being asked to dance. And I think, well, I could talk to you about can you tell the ideas through the work? Because that would be the intention. Okay. I'm just going to show the slides until I have something to say. My brother is a scientist who figured out a way to grow nerves through a silicone chip. He's a hand surgeon who couldn't get the nerves to grow back right on the thumb. So he could get the whole cable, if you think of a telephone line, to hook up, but all the individual phone lines would be mismatched. And he did this at Stanford. And again, you can start to see that that is a cross-section of the actual chip that they made at Stanford to grow nerves through. You'll see it later. He would send me the imagery, and this is called magnetic field. This is all chiseled out and inlaid. And again, I guess I'm trying to study that. At this point, I'm showing at Borgenicht on 57th Street. And I've also, in addition to studying Renaissance drawing technique, I'm also studying Chinese landscape painting and Zen painting and Asian calligraphic mark making, mostly because it comes through this thing I see. I don't know if you can get it from the slides, but I basically feel like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Everything you're looking at is like, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but he's got this, like he sees it in the mashed potatoes. He sees it in everything. And I'm seeing in the heron and the hawk and, you know, in abstraction, in minimalism, in, you know, chess sets, this thing everywhere, this spiral formation where I'm out in the snow, in 4 feet of snow, drawing this double spiral in this tree, and I was completely, for 2 years, studying this movement, trying to figure it out, you know, basically acting like Leonardo da Vinci. This is not like a current New York idea. And I figured it out, and I was just covered in paint, and I showed my friend, and he said, it's like the yin-yang sign you see in the Chinese restaurant. What's the big deal, you know? And I was mortified because I spent 2 years trying to understand this thing. And a friend of mine came in and he said, Jane, you discovered yin-yang for yourself. There's nothing new under the sun. And you found this from a seed, from a mustard seed. You found this thing through art. For me, art really is the byproduct of this lifelong investigation. And the language of drawing is clearly a language that bypasses your mental constructs and allows you to access more of yourself simultaneously. If we're composed of parts, it's the place that allows the parts to communicate. And I got invited to go to Portugal. My career's going pretty well, and they invite 5 American sculptors to go as guests of the Portuguese government to work with their marble. And I had never worked with stone. I'm basically the Play-Doh school, you know. I was coming out as a painter, and they, you know, offered us this great opportunity. So I went with my assistant, Daniela Dueling, and they're huge. This is like 6 feet. I don't know if you know how much 6 feet of marble weighs. It's 100 pounds for 12 cubic inches. And I chiseled it out and inlaid it with my material, which you might want to ask me about if I'm still upright. And this piece is basically called Sun Moon. And it came because I read some esoteric information by a Russian mathematician named Uspensky, who said the sun, the moon, the stars that we see are cross-sections of spirals, which we do not see. The cross-sections do not fall out of the spirals for the same reason by which the cross-section of an apple does not fall out of the apple, you know. And so I was going nuts in Portugal because we found an orange and we were cutting it at all these different slices, trying to find the movement. And I had this huge discovery you'll see in the work, that the forward roll on the wave, can you see my hand? Okay, you get a hawk. Then you get to here and you get basically a raven or a neutral animal. Here you get a sparrow, a wolf, a lamb. And that there were these double, you know, that there's this double spiral or this double movement. So we were cutting up huge pieces of marble to try to understand how it worked. And actually, in here, I chiseled out, I saw the crane, and Mitsubishi bought it, and like they put it in there. Oh, never mind. So that's my studio in New York. And you can see how I don't see any difference between materials. I'm speaking so badly, I really apologize. I have beautiful notes, but for some reason I was going to be nervous about this. This was all one show, and it was called Sun Moon Series. you've lost the head. On the left is Horus, which is from the Egyptian god Horus, which is the sun god. And he had, you know, very often the body of a man and the head of a hawk, but the falcon they thought was the highest god, representing the energy of the sun, that which could see both in and out simultaneously. And the idea that we live our lives without being present to them. And the idea that there was this higher form of energy. So I started really studying Egyptian hieroglyphs because it was a visual language that spoke about how one lived. Oh, and also you have to understand, I'm living in Manhattan and I'm working from nature, right? So this was, somebody threw out a tree on Green Street. And it was this huge, beautiful tree, and you know it was some idiot that was redecorating. So I dragged the tree home, and this is made from the root of the tree, and then I flipped it over. So this is actually a tree from Green Street. I was the original recycler of... Okay, so from... All right, we'll go back to the art world part. So I sold out the show of marble at Borgenicht on 57th Street. And someone said to me, what are you going to do? You sold out the show. I said, I'm going to get a circular saw. And they said, think more like a Volvo, you know. I mean, it didn't. And so I went to my brother's for Thanksgiving in California, and they drove me over the hill to the ocean. And I looked to the right, and there was a hawk and this hill and the light hitting in a certain way. And I realized from having been in Portugal, where for the first time in my life I had worked outside in the sun, and I saw the movement of light from the sun on the marble. And I thought, okay, I will work in nature. So I took the money and went to California. When they drove me over the hill and I saw this place to the right, I said, I want to live there. Just so for students, everyone said, nobody lives there. Look, cows live there. And I found a house on the top of the mountain that happened to be owned by a collector who bought my work, and they gave me the house. And I moved to an unbelievably remote area. I mean, my only neighbor in 50 miles is Neil Young, who's like a rock and roll singer, and he has 12,000 acres. And I'm this born and bred New Yorker who's unbelievably kind of neurotic about nature or bugs. I'm very Woody Allen on this. And at the same time, I'm absolutely drawn to this thing that I have to find. And I felt like Jerry Lewis in a Zen monastery. Oh my God, it's nature! You know, I was like in this place by myself. Little by little, there's a great John Cage quote. Do you know who he is? He said when he first went into his studio, everyone was there with him. Art critics, his family, other artists, his friends. And that little by little and one by one, they all disappeared. Until if he was really lucky, even he disappeared. And I think that's what happened to me in California, was at the beginning of this talk, you see my New York self. Little by little, you'll start to see myself with a capital S, if we're really lucky. And I needed, as a New Yorker, the quiet and removing myself from the art world, because one of the things I felt very strongly was that, unlike my friends, Judy, somebody said to Judy, I said I was in the art world, and they said, is Jane in the art world? And she said, not unless it's some kind of like intergalactic golf art world. You can't get her to go to an opening. She's like growing CP pods. And I guess I understood that if you have a choice in life, that the choice I was making was that my true wish was to become whole before I died. My true wish was not to become famous. Not to become famous. If I had a choice between being well known and in the art world, or really seeking to become whole and understand my questions, that on my gravestone I want them to write, she was whole, not she was famous. And I literally walked away from this other world. The irony is I actually think you have a job to do as an artist. There are fantastic ox herding stories where he says you have to go off into the country to remove yourself from your ego. And the ego is represented in Zen by the ox. And then he says, there are the 10 ox herding stories. They're very beautiful. The 10th story is bringing the ox to town. Once you've mastered the ox, your job is to be able to go to town with it. I'm obviously still working on that. So this is the first show at Mincher Wilcox in San Francisco. I had never seen old growth redwood, and someone had thrown it all out. Mountain Man Burl, it was like Twin Peaks. He had one arm and a broken back, and he gave me all this wood. I better move because I'm starting to relax. It could go a long time. So this is called listening, and that's called hand wing. And I was, again, looking to contain energy within the space. They're about 6 feet, and it's coming from my study of this. This is Scallop Shell Mountain. That's about 8 feet, and I guess I hope you can see that I'm trying to find the flow and movement of things. I'm now studying fluid mechanics. Basically, that's where I'm up to here. This is called yoke. And again, I'm trying to figure out between a rough surface and a smooth surface and inside and outside. And I think, I'll go back to Jane Hammond. She said, she asked me what I wanted to be when I was a kid. And I said I could never decide whether I wanted to be an artist, a psychiatrist, or a veterinarian. And she said, oh, that's interesting. You make psychological art about animals. You did all three. That's an 8-foot drawing. I had never seen a great horned owl, and they're posted at night. So I hope that you can see that I'm working both abstractly and figuratively, and containing the energy in both, so that the story that I think I've been put here to tell, which I'm beginning to understand a little better, as you'll see. This is the early 90s. This drawing's called Mercedes Multiple Personality. There was a program on multiple personality, and I was sure I had it. And again, that's coming back full circle. As I try to understand something, I draw it. I always start from direct observation. I study the form as best I can through the Renaissance laws of the growth of form. There's a fabulous book by Darcy Thompson called On Growth and Form that Marsden Hartley and Bill Jensen and a bunch of other people have really looked at. And as I begin to understand it better, this is actually Mercedes. So these are, I broke it. There. These are drawings about Mercedes. And my house was right above Mercedes. And I threw carrots down all day to keep them there so I could draw them. So we call this carrots from heaven. The horses would come running out. I'm living on this horse ranch with 60 horses. And I've learned the language of animals, living alone as a hermit. And they would just stand there all day and wait for carrots from heaven. But you can see, even here, from here to here to here to here, it's no different than the abstract work I was showing you in the 80s. And this is a show called Better Nature at Borgenicht on 57th Street, I had seen a show in New York called After Nature. And they were saying there was no more nature. So I did a show called Better Nature, which was like better nature than the crap you're handing me. So that piece is called Race. And I'm living in New York again. It's not like I'm just living in California. I'm spending 6 months in New York and 6 months in California. And, you know, going back and forth. I'm not giving a formal slide talk. I probably could, I'm not sure, but this piece is actually at the Yellowstone Museum. And on Oak Island, I took pontoons from a catamaran, and this piece is at the Brooklyn Museum, and it's 8 feet, and inside, I just decided to make a giant boat beak. I don't see any difference between abstraction and figuration or, you know, post-minimalism or Chinese landscape painting or Renaissance drawing technique. It all seems to me to be a language with which we can investigate our biggest questions in a way that our small mind can't take in. And there's a presence that certain objects have, even if it's a small pot that, you know, I saw a little Japanese pot at the Met, and I cried because there was an energy contained within it that spoke of the laws of all things. And I guess I want to get at those laws with this work. So this piece is called Lunar Phases. And from this side, you can only see black, and from that side, you can only see yellow, and I bet you can guess what I was studying. I'm going to just skip through these. This is from Structure, Form, and Movement, which is a book by Heinrich Hertel. And the whole next series came from stationary eddy patterns. These are giant drawings. The one on the right is called Hawk Wave, and I was trying to study this movement of the wave. Here I was trying to study landscape. The drawings are good, though. They are true drawings. They're not... I was living in New York, and I couldn't breathe. So this is like, I took one of the horse head forms, which is that shape there, and I made it into a fan and covered it in resin and called it Bellows because it was like this oxygen tank. And it was trying to blow air onto a fire is what it felt like. And I moved back to California. These are the Visible Woman series. What time is it? Okay. I'm just going to run through all the new work, which I won't talk about. This is 94, 95. Tibetan medical text was the next area of study. And I started to line things up so I could see these movements. And this is called PC, which was for Pacific Coast versus Politically Correct. And I'm doing Chinese glazing technique with boat building resin. And I have a deep and abiding love for minimalism. And I come from minimalism with maximal ideas. So the kind of registration of those things is always exceedingly complicated. And as I get to understand it the best, I go back to so-called the drawing board. These pieces are called Pray Pray, P-R-E-Y, P-R-A-Y. And I'm studying the Tibetan medical text as well as female figures invoking the power from 4000 BC. She had the head of a bird. So I've got this vast interest in knowledge as it relates to being or wisdom. What knowledge actually helps you to be versus knowledge for the sake of knowing? And I study those things. Those are actual nerves growing through a silicone chip that my brother grew through, which is quite extraordinary research that he's done because he can literally go chip to chip and bypass paralysis. And he studied sculpture at Cornell and then went to Stanford Medical School. And he says the reason that he's involved in invention is because he was trained as an artist. That the artist's way of seeing can know things that nothing else is possible to, you know. He said that at Stanford there's a think tank with these guys sitting in there all day watching bumblebees that technically, according to physics, they can't get lift, and yet they do. But an artist can understand it with what's known as an intuitive or instinctive intelligence. And I want to know how to educate that. Because he's got that, I've got that. How do we put that into our doctors? Which is why I'm teaching at Berkeley. Which is why I'm teaching the computer scientists. Because if they can see what I see, they will not destroy the planet. They won't vote for Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is called Chinese proverb. Again, you can see me going back to studying. And basically, I grew up with this book called Chinese Proverbs. My mother, for some reason, thought she was Chinese. She was Russian. But anyway, it said, the best horse cannot wear two saddles. And I thought, how am I going to do this? Because I'm living in New York and California. And you can see here me holding, you know, from a bird to a dolphin to a, that I'm trying to see from this shell called a coxcomb oyster shell, how our hands work, that we're two-handed in that way. It seemed like a very big thing, and I did that with coffee stains. This piece is called Personify. I took 2 shots of it. The great part of getting a little more successful is you can document your work. And so that's just rough plaster over built armatures with the drawings to figure it out. And that's 28 coats. I decided to do Rembrandt glazing technique with boat building resin. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm going to just show the rest of the slides and not talk anymore. How's that? Tibetan medical text. This is, I can't, all right. It's a fantastic book. The Tibetans teach their doctors through imagery, and they're better doctors. This is the amount of urine you would fill up in a lifetime, this size house. Fabulous. And you can see me starting to study the relationships of how we go from one form to another and how things are made. I got invited to go to Pilchuck, Judy again, and to go to Pilchuck glass blowing facility, and I took all of my dog's stuffed toys and covered them in wax, and tried to figure out how to make animal puppets as if we were, well, all right, I'm not going to talk. That's glass from those. So these are the plaster buddies. I call all animals buddies. They're between Buddhas and buddies. This is hand-blown glass that I learned how to do because the glass is very extraordinary in that it's a molten substance that has to be turned constantly and works in layers, just like the prints. And when you watch Dante Marioni, who is on the other end of the punty stick blowing, he would be like this. He looked like Stevie Wonder. And I said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm listening for the center." This is called Scales hemoglobin, and it's all blown glass done with layers of pigments that are glass pigments. So you have to do one casing after another. And it's called Scales hemoglobin because I found out that, well, it's hemoglobin chlorophyll, that hemoglobin and chlorophyll have the same chemical makeup. And I thought, I'm a plant. I'm not talking about the presence or the form or the formal issues. I have never been a modernist. I'm either a pre-modernist or a postmodernist. I'm probably a pre-modernist. This is called Blown Race. This is the Clumper series. Again, I'm studying the horses. I can't talk anymore. It's weird. You talk so much at the beginning of the talk, and then when you get to the new work that you really want to talk about, you're spent. That drawing's called Rosen and Michelangelo. We're up to this year. That's, I'm very proud of that piece because it's 4 casings of glass, and I very much wanted to make a piece of glass feel like a piece of redwood and really try to understand the relationships between these surface movements and the growth of the form itself, so that the thing grows and shows you the nature of the form. I think I've learned an awful lot in 30 years, although I'm really not telling you about it very well. This is Portuguese marble again, so we're coming full circle. This is last year. No, some of it's in New York. I'm going back and forth, and most of these were done up with Billy Morris or Dale Chihuly up in Pilchuck. There are a bunch of I trade them drawing lessons for glass help. I don't know much about the technique, but I couldn't believe how much I could learn by the reiteration or movement. Because I see it all as this language, and it's telling me what I want to know. I can't tell it to you in words. I can give it to you in art. Because there are no words for this thing. So, yeah, a lot of this is being done in These are all done either in Seattle. These drawings, which are what I did to come here, which are the mapping series, were done in California. And I'm doing these. I should have talked about the show I did with Judy called Reading Tea Leaves. And what I do here is I start by spilling coffees and teas and working with the sun and a hose. And I'm definitely out of process art. And I could tell you 20 people I hung out with that I learned it from, but for some reason, I'm not going to. And the way this came, there's this fabulous quote by Leonardo da Vinci, who I have just now decided to mention is probably the biggest influence on me of everyone. And he talked about, if you wish to really invent or understand how to see or draw, study walls spotted with stains or variegated stones. And in those you will find rivers, mountains, battles, horses, and all things. And so these drawings were about coastal mapping and trying to understand really the way to invent or see through the actual markings or flows of water. And I have deer that stand outside my studio and I give apples to them and they just watch me all day and I draw them and I'm learning about that from. And these are photographs that my dad, who was a great, great man, took. And I realized that we saw the same thing and that he actually taught me about the seeing of nature and the nature of seeing. So I thought it would be nice to end with that. And that's it. I'm done.